Hi, I'm Deborah Martin. Welcome back to the InvisAble Matters podcast. This is where you learn things about yourself as you become more aware of the needs of other people. Remember, sometimes there are invisible matters that people are coping with in their day-to-day lives that you simply may not be aware of. My topic today is invisible matters in the workplace. And actually, this topic about 5 years ago, the conversation would be very different back then. We all know that the pandemic was a surprising experience, but a lot of organizations, businesses just had to scramble and revamp how they were doing their businesses and continuing on. And so the conversation today will really touch what kinds of invisible matters are taking place in the workplace, such as it is evolving today, and how can we cope with some of those invisible matters and just learn more about what other people are dealing with on their jobs. And I would like to welcome Nandy Howard.
Hello.
Nandy is an HR and DEI professional, and she is the perfect person for me to have this conversation with. I know I'm going to learn a lot because I'm old school, and so some of the terms that I hear young folks use, in this day and time about their jobs, and I'm like, what is that?
She said, y'all making up terms.
All of these acronyms, ABCs, and all of that. So
that's fair.
So we're going to dig in deep today.
Okay.
And I'll walk away more educated, and hopefully our viewers will as well.
We both will. I feel like I'm going to learn something from you as well, so I'm excited.
All right, perfect. So, Nandy, just, briefly tell us a little bit about your experiences in the field of HR.
Yeah. So, brief history just in like my background. When I graduated, I went to Spelman College, and immediately after graduating, I went into recruiting, and I was in recruiting on the agency side, and I got to see a lot of how things happen in the background and how we even get our jobs in the first place. And I think that was the first time I realized there's a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think I just came in with a young set of eyes and started questioning things. From there, I pivoted to recruiting for one specific company. So agency recruiting is like you're recruiting for multiple clients. I then went to go recruit for Capital One, and I went to different employers in the corporate America space to do recruiting. And then probably 3 or 4 years into my career, I realized DE&I, like you can't do recruiting without weaving in DE&I. It just has to be ingrained in you.
And tell us what DEI is.
For sure. Well, DE&I stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. In the past decade, I would say that I was added to diversity and equity, and they all are equally important. We started with D, so the diversity is like, well, ain't nobody here that looks like me, And then they realize, okay, you're here, but you're not sitting at the table. And that's when they brought in that equity piece of things. And I'm trying to find the best way to explain it. There's this perfect description, and maybe I could send you the photo of it and you can pop it on the screen. But it's like all these kids are looking over a fence, and one of them, like the shortest one, can't see over the fence, so they give him a stepping stool so they can all see at the same level playing ground. But some people look at that and it's like, it's unfair, you're giving him an advantage. And it's like, no, we're just trying to give him an equal footing as everybody else. And then you have inclusion, and it's just being able to sit at the table, because too often it's like you'll find companies will check off the diversity standpoint and will bring in like Black, white, Hispanic, or people who are neurodivergent, but once they're there, they won't include them in the conversation. So that inclusion piece has been really pivotal these past few years, because a lot of companies were just comfortable with well, you guys are here, what else do you want from us?
Right, because, most of my career, the word was diversity. That's all we heard.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad to hear that it has evolved. And with the equity piece, can you give me an example? Because you gave an example of, if one child was shorter than the other. So I think about ADA. accommodations
Yeah.
when I hear that. But you may be thinking something totally different.
No, that's like perfect. So ADA, for those who might not know, the American Disabilities Act was set in place for people who have a disability, and it protects them so that they're not discriminated against, whether it's in the workplace or I think in just public life in general. And things like that are so important because you have a lot of people, and even I saw it from a recruiting standpoint, where they wouldn't give individuals who are, possibly they might identify as, I'm trying to think of, they might say they're not neurodivergent, or they might be autistic. I'll just say they're autistic, and they won't even give them a chance based off of like maybe their biases. And now you have things like ADA that's set in place where it's like, you have an equal footing. Like you will get the interview. You should be interviewed fairly as if you were anybody else with or without that. Another thing I think of is like with BRGs, business resource groups, oftentimes you'll see development programs, maybe at a Google, the Black Business Resource Group will create a development program because they realize there are a lot of challenges people of color deal with in the workplace where it's like, we're going to equip you with the tools so you get somewhat of an equal playing ground as your white counterparts. And a lot of our white counterparts get it because they recognize their privilege. So it's necessary, and I think a lot of people are beginning to get on board.
Okay. So with bringing people on, can you talk about, or are there any hidden biases that you feel are part of hiring people and bringing them to organizations?
For sure. And it's going to get a little testy, but I just think sometimes when you think of biases, we all say like unconscious biases. We do the trainings, but really don't think of what that looks like in our own lives. And even as, women of color, as a Black woman, like I have unconscious biases that, I'm not privy to. But I see it in the workplace when it's like, you want to interview people who look like you. It's a natural human inclination to want to hire someone who you might think it's easier to work with because there's a lot of similarities. You might have the same background. You may have gone to the same boarding school or the same whatever the case is. And it's like, we don't realize how often that influences our decisions, but we also don't realize how it perpetuates a lot of things that we're trying to get past, like when it comes to inequities in the workplace. And it takes a certain level of mindfulness to be like, am I saying no to this person because they really don't have the skill set? Or am I saying no to this person because I have this unconscious bias that people with disabilities don't do the job as well? Like you really have to check your biases on a day-to-day basis, whether it's in the recruiting process, whether you're working with your colleague, but it's easier said than done.
But honestly, and there's no way to tell, how often do you think people are really checking themselves? When I'm asking the hard questions today. But seriously, do people really just kind of step back and think about all of that? However, am I being a little judgmental here?
I think, speaking honestly, like if you're in the recruiting field, I think it's become so ingrained that you have to think about it a bit more. If you're a good recruiter, if you're good at what you do, but I think if you're a hiring manager or if you're an employee, you're less likely to think about it. And that's scary, but I think that's why it's so important to keep people around you that continue to challenge your mindsets of being like, well, why are you thinking about it that way?
So let me give you an example because people have conversations and talk about things, and then we go out into the world of work and we have a real situation and we got to think about all of that.
Yeah.
So for me as a business owner, I do advocacy. And so when I hire people, advocates to represent the company, I know I have a internal bias. I don't know why, but I don't care how old you are, but I care how old you look. So if you have a younger appearance, some people in their 20s might look like they're 16, 17. Yeah. So I'm going to share what I think may be a personal bias that I have as a business owner when I'm hiring advocates to represent my company. I know that I don't care how old you are, but it's very, for some reason, important in terms of how old you look. And I always worry that our clients will think that a younger looking person does not have the knowledge and experience of advocacy and representing their child as someone my age would. So is that wrong?
It's not. First, I applaud you for like even recognizing that is possibly an unconscious bias of yours, but I understand why you do it. And I think you do it because of, to your point, society doesn't always respect people based on like the years of experience that they have. They don't think they bring the expertise to the table. I do think you might be missing out on some hidden gems by taking that approach, because I do think you have people who have been in their careers, 15, 20 years, that you might meet someone who has 5 years of experience who may love what they do so deeply that they can do laps around that person.
And willing to learn.
Yeah.
And I don't do it. It goes through my mind.
Yeah.
But I'm like, Deborah, okay, you know better than that.
And that's normal.
Give this person a chance. So I do a checklist. Just to hold myself accountable. But I know, just like me, everybody else probably has their own thoughts about, I don't think I want to look at that person every day. That's ridiculous.
It is, but you have to think, like, it is crazy when we think of it in the grand scheme of things, but there's so many things that influence that. Like, where you grow up, what you see, who you were around growing up influenced so many of those decisions, where it's like, when we think about where we might have those biases, I feel like we got to show ourselves grace sometimes and understand like what influenced those decisions, or like why we make the decisions that we make. But it doesn't mean we can stop there.
Right.
And I think the beauty of like this younger generation is like they're going to call us out on our biases. So either we do the work or they're going to force us to do the work.
I have so many questions for you. My brain is just like, So in terms of I would say people of color having to navigate the workspace in person, on Zoom. However, I've heard this term disarm or disarming. Tell me what that is and how that relates to that.
Yeah, I think just thinking from like a historical context, being a brown person in America, people see like weaponize our skin before we even open our mouths, unfortunately. And when you're in the workplace setting, like if you want to grow and you want to succeed, you have to get people on your side. I hate to put it this way, but it's like it's a game and you got to be strategic. So I find that a lot of us at a very young age learn how to disarm people, and we don't even realize we're disarming people to get people to buy into a strategy that we're trying to get support with, or to get people, like to get allies around an idea you might have. But I know for myself, and I've seen it happen with a lot of my just colleagues, whether it's you're a woman, if you're a minority, I feel like you've had to disarm somebody. Being in HR, I'm typically one of the only Black women on my team. I'm so used to being the only Black person on my calls that I've worked with people where it's like, I might be the first Black person you've ever dealt with. And what you see about me when you turn on the news is my community is violent. I might not be articulate or this or that. And I have to come in here and not only just prove you wrong on those things, but I also have to make you feel safe. And it sucks that we have to do that. I don't think it's okay, and we shouldn't have to do those things, but to get to where you want to get and to get the things done, you do have to do those things, unfortunately. And like I said earlier, I don't think we even realize we're doing it sometimes, but I think too many of us are used to being the only in spaces. And to continue to grow in our careers, we've had to just sometimes play mental games with people, and not in a way that's malicious, but in a way that protects us and allows us to grow.
So when you say disarm, is that like toning down?
It's not. For me, it's not toning down. I think it's allowing, like, humanizing myself for people. I think people will automatically see you in this professional setting, but like for me, it looks like I'm your regular girl's girl. Like, I'm a dog mom. I'm a plant. Like, we got a lot more in common than what you realize. And there's so much more for us to bond over. I think working in DE&I, like, that's the one gift that it's given me. Like, I've worked with people. One of my closest friends is an Indian woman who lives in Singapore. And like, I would have regular calls with her every Tuesday to be like, teach me cultural norms that I might not know about your community. And when I say we don't got nothing in common, we don't got nothing in common. But it, us having those conversations where we just humanize one another, of like learning about each other and each other's cultures and backgrounds, it allowed us to have better ways of working, and also it allowed me to get a friend in the workplace and an ally. Like, all those things matter. I'm like, you can be great at your role, and especially as a Black person, you could be excellent at your role, but if people do not like you, if people are not on your team, it is dang near impossible to get things done. And some people might disagree, but like with the work that I do, you got to have allies.
So if people don't like you, you might, if you were a white man, you might not advance. So what's the difference? I know that's a tough one.
That's a tough one. If you're a white man, you might not advance. For sure, you might not advance. But I think there are a lot more hurdles if you're a person of color. Like, definitely there are challenges for every person, I would say. But I think for us, in America specifically, due to our historical, due to U.S. history and like the history of our nation, there's a lot of reasons why there's more oppression when it comes to us versus other individuals. Right.
So let me talk about, I got so much, but let's talk about the evolution of the workplace, workspace in terms of online teams. And some people never meet, their boss. So as I always say, a lot of people have stuff that make them up, that I might have social anxiety. And so, first of all, being on a Zoom camera close up is anxiety, provoking for some people, and having to speak, and having to try to build a connection with my coworkers. But I'm already an anxious person, and now I'm on stage. It's like I'm on TV. So how would you suggest that people kind of cope with those types of feelings and learn to overcome them?
I think you actually bring up a really, really great point, because I think sometimes when we think of this new way of working and being in like these hybrid environments, you have the younger generations who are like, we love it. We're not trying to go into the office. We're not trying to do the commute. But we don't take into account the people who might have social anxiety. And it's like the people who might want to grow in their career. And it's much harder to build those relationships in a virtual environment. And I would be lying if I said it doesn't take a lot more intentionality. I think I've been remote for 7 years. I've had managers that if they passed me on the street, I would not know who that woman was. But I'm like, I think when I really started to grow in my career, I just had to start being curious, and like it takes a certain level of curiosity and putting yourself out there. But I recognize it's hard. But the beauty of like that virtual world is like there is the barrier that when we were going into the office, a lot of us had to deal with like the water cooler conversations, I think what they call them, where it's like you go over there and
everybody's standing around.
John, Jake, and Jill are joking about something that you don't get, and it's not relevant to you or your community or your culture. And now in these virtual environments, if you're good at your job and you're just, in my opinion, you're a little curious, it can take you a lot further. So you can step away. That's the beauty of the virtual environment. Like you can step away, you can go on a walk, you can go sit in a room in your home where it's like, I'm overwhelmed. Whereas in an office setting,
I never thought about it from that standpoint.
Yeah. Like you have a bit more boundaries, in my opinion. And I love remote working for that reason. It's just like, if I can do my job just as well in a virtual environment, like, I think coming together for collaboration at times is great, but just like it gives some people anxiety being in these virtual settings, it gives a lot more people anxiety being in person, especially when they're one of the only in those spaces.
That's right. Right. It's two-sided coin.
Yeah.
I think.
I have a question to just piggyback off of that. Have you heard of like Zoom fatigue, where and the option of having your camera on or off, and just some people actually.
I was
prefer
just
to
getting
have
ready to
that-
ask about cameras off. I don't
Okay.
play that.
Okay. Oh well, but because some people it's more tiring to have your camera on all day versus if you can have your camera off.
Yeah.
Just talking about the differences there, because when your camera's on, you kind of feel, when you're not talking, like you feel like you have to
Watch your
Why is
face.
that different versus when you're in person at a meeting?
So what is it called?
Zoom
Zoom
fatigue.
fatigue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I can give you examples. Like, I think that's a really great point, especially when you think of maybe persons with, like, I've had a black girlfriend where they pinged her. They were like, you look a little upset. And she's like, I'm just relaxing. Like, I'm reading through notes.
Yes.
Oh Lord. Okay.
RBF.
So Zoom fatigue.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Let's talk about Zoom fatigue. That's a newer term. Again, that has evolved as a necessity.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, so I feel like Zoom fatigue became big during COVID, since we were all in these virtual environments, and it's being on all day. Like, your camera's on, you're on calls with your friends and stuff, or with your colleagues, excuse me. And by the end of the day, you're exhausted from smiling and just being mindful of, like, your unconscious. I would say just your unconscious in general. And there's the fatigue really comes from, and I see it with women of color, just people of color in general, when some things where it's like we're literally relaxing, like we're not thinking about anything, and that can be misinterpreted. And that's kind of the challenge with these virtual worlds. It's like your body language can be easily misinterpreted, where you're like, I was just reading an email, or I just got a ping. And I've had a girlfriend get a message from, like, her manager to be like, you might want to check your face because it looks like, you're thinking about a lot, or it looks like you might have an attitude. And she was like, that wasn't my intent at all, and that goes back to the biases of, like, sometimes people place certain labels on us, and it's just like, that's not what it is. But yeah, Zoom fatigue, it's a very real thing, and it's a gift and a curse to being in the virtual world. And I think that's one of the curses that come with being in a virtual environment.
And so when we talk about inclusion, and again, I work with people who have special needs. I know it's a two-sided coin. Let's talk about Zoom fatigue. That's a newer term. Again, that has evolved as a necessity.
Yeah.
What is it?
Yeah, so I feel like Zoom fatigue became big during COVID, since we were all in these virtual environments, and it's being on all day. Like, your camera's on, you're on calls with your friends and stuff, or with your colleagues, excuse me. And by the end of the day, you're exhausted from smiling and just being mindful of, like, your unconscious. I would say just your unconscious in general. And there's the fatigue really comes from, and I see it with women of color, just people of color in general, when some things where it's like we're literally relaxing, like we're not thinking about anything, and that can be misinterpreted. And that's kind of the challenge with these virtual worlds. It's like your body language can be easily misinterpreted, where you're like, I was just reading an email, or I just got a ping. And I've had a girlfriend get a message from, like, her manager to be like, you might want to check your face because it looks like, you're thinking about a lot, or it looks like you might have an attitude. And she was like, that wasn't my intent at all, and that goes back to the biases of, like, sometimes people place certain labels on us, and it's just like, that's not what it is. But yeah, Zoom fatigue, it's a very real thing, and it's a gift and a curse to being in the virtual world. And I think that's one of the curses that come with being in a virtual environment.
And so when we talk about inclusion, and again, I work with people who have special needs. I know it's a two-sided coin, if you will, in terms of the person with a special need has to or has the choice of sharing that disability.
Yeah.
Or not. Some people work really hard to make sure that people know that they have a disability. And some people work just as hard to make sure that people don't know. However, you are who you are in the workplace. And sometimes other people are misunderstanding actions, words, productivity, all of those things because they don't know what somebody else is dealing with. This is a tough subject. We know that there are laws now to protect people who have special needs. But have you found that people are open and willing more so to share than not?
I found older generations tend not to share. And it's because historically, like, the workforce hasn't been as accommodating for them, or they have had to debunk a lot of people's preconceived notions of what that looks like. Oh, you have, Parkinson's, or you have, you're autistic. Well, you probably can't do the job as well. When in all actuality, there was a study done where they brought in people, I believe they brought in some individuals into like a bakery, and they hired like all these young students who had autism, and they brought them into the bakery, and they were like, what you don't realize is sometimes you teach them something, and depending on where they are, like, they're so specific that they're the best bakers out there,
The routine.
like they're on time, the structure, and like, but if you have never seen those things, in your mind it's like, well, I'm gonna have to train them. You have a lot of people who think those things, and if you don't mind me calling out, I think that's why it's so important when companies put in those trainings of like, take your unconscious bias training. I'm a culprit. I didn't click through it without listening to all the content, maybe because I've taken it like 15 times now, but it's so important for us to refresh, like to stay on top of things like that, because we don't realize who we're taking opportunities from. And not only are we taking the opportunities from them, but we don't realize what value they would have added to our organizations or the teams or the projects that we're working on. So I'm sorry, I feel like I strayed away from your question, but wanted to throw in there.
No, it was a big question because it could go in many different directions. I like to encourage people to access accommodations and supports. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you go in and put a sign on your desk, to everybody in the office to know your personal business. However, if you have a sleeping disorder or you're suffering from depression and you can't sleep at night and you're late more than you're on time, you don't want to lose your job. And so there are regulations in place to help you kind of maneuver that with your boss. And that's the kind of thing I'm saying. You have to talk, communicate, and let someone know.
Can I add to that? Because how I was saying older generations, I don't think they disclose, but I used to lead our internship program, and actually more recently, one of our interns, before she started, she emailed me and she's like, hey, I want to let you know, I'm on the spectrum, and I might get a little overwhelmed, but when I get overwhelmed, I'm just going to step away, but I don't want you to think I'm being rude. And I told her, I was, first I let her know, hey, if you need any accommodations, we have a whole team who is here to support you. But also, I understand there's a lot of fear in sharing those things, but when you share those things, it's easier for people to advocate and support you. Because when she was in person and I was supporting her, people might be like, oh, what's going on with her? And I'm not going to disclose that because that's not my business. That's right. It's a legal thing. You don't disclose things like that. But it's more so like, she's good, she's fine, she just needed a moment to step away, but she'll be back, and being able to advocate for that person. But had I not known that, I probably maybe would have thought like, maybe she finds our curriculum really boring and she's ready to go home. So I do think it's these younger generations understand it's not always going to be, more times than not, it's not going to be used against you, and if it is used against you, then you have
there are
American
regulations about that.
Yeah, to protect you, where you can do a lawsuit, you know, and I would hope that it doesn't get to that point, but ADA was created for that reason.
Speaking of, I've heard several younger folks talk about mental health leave. I guess am I using the right term? What is that? Explain that to our viewers.
Come on.
I know what mental health is, but in terms of taking leave,
for sure.
there was no such thing when I was working.
Yeah, so I think, are referring to FMLA, so Family Medical Leave of Absence, and it is a policy, like an act that was set in place where it allows you to take time away from work where you're protected, where you won't lose your job in that time to take care of yourself, or in some cases take care of somebody in your family. And it's really, really special. And unfortunately, a lot of people in our community don't take advantage of it because they think that it will be used against them. But what people don't understand is they cannot fire you during that time. You're protected during that time. And it can be for up to 12 weeks of, you know, where you have time away from work to just recharge, reset, and take care of yourself.
Is it with pay sometimes or not?
So that's a great point. Great question. Sometimes it's not, but there are things that will allow you to still replace that income that was lost. So you can get short-term disability insurance, whether that's through your employer or outside your employer. Like, I have mine outside of my employer, and then I'll have some with my employer, where if I ever have to take, you know, some time away from work, I might get 60% of my pay from my outside insurer. And then I might get like maybe I would need to look into my company's policy, maybe like another 20-30% to make up for what I would have lost. So there's ways to still get around not being paid. But if you need that time and you feel like you are burning out, or you're dealing with Sunday scaries, or you are anxious going into meetings, like, take it. I have a girlfriend, she's probably my age, and she just took FMLA, and I would see her. I felt like I was watching her crash in front of me, and I told her, I was like, you should take FMLA, and she's like, I can't do that. And she figured out how to do it, and when she did it, she looked at me, she was like, that literally was one of the best things I could have done for myself. And I'm just like, these things are set in place to take care of us, and I wish we would use them more often, because everybody else uses them except for us.
Right.
So yeah, it's a beautiful thing when it's taken advantage of.
Okay. Let's talk about work-life balance.
It's a beautiful thing. You gotta love it.
We need to talk about that.
Yeah.
Because I have a problem with that. I know. And I think we had another guest here that said sometimes people think it has to be 50-50, and it may not be 50-50 for you.
Yeah.
You may have a different formula, but share some thoughts about that.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that you say that, and like where you're at with work-life balance, because I was doing research into it, and it's like based on generations, work-life balance looks very different. So traditionalists are like our grandparents, and to them, work-life balance is not a thing. Don't bring it up to them. They're not trying to hear about it. And then you have, right under that, you have baby boomers. And baby boomers, it's still a challenge for them. They're, you know, the generation that's big on job security. You stick around, you work hard. And then you have, I want to say right under that is Gen X. And Gen X was like the first generation to be like, I don't know why we working like this. Like, you know, I want a little bit more of a, you know, balance. And then you have millennials who came right after that, where they're like, we don't need to be face to face to have all these, you know, conversations. And by the time Gen Z came around, Gen Z is so big on work-life balance. And I think Gen Z and millennials have pushed the work-life balance narrative now to the point where it's like, we're not sacrificing that. Like, our job is not who we are. Our job is not our life. It is a means to an end for a lot of us. And you can still do meaningful work, but it not encompass your entire life. And that's what we saw with, you know, my grandparents' generation and our parents' generations, where it's like, you work hard and you get everything you want, and you might be a little bit of exhausted, or you might be burnt out, but it's like you get to retirement age and you never got to do any of the things that you wanted to do. And not to say that was the case for all of them, but
no,
A lot
many,
of,
for
yeah. And I think these younger generations, like millennials and Gen Z, when we think of work-life balance, it's like, we want the cake and we want to be able to enjoy it while we got the cake. Like we want to be able to like smell the roses. Like I don't know how else to put it. Like we want to go on the vacation. We don't want to save up that nest egg because who knows if we'll even
Right.
make it to that
And you
point.
all will just pick up and go. And
The flight was booked before the conversation. Like, the last thing I just wanted to mention around, work-life balance and the beauty, I'll say this. A lot of people give Gen Z a hard time. Like they view them as these rebels that are shaking up the workforce, but it's like a lot of the things that they're coming in and the ways that they're changing, the ways, like the way of working as we know it, it benefits us all. And I think like baby boomers and traditionalists and like those older generations, it seems scary. It seems scary, but if you remain open to these ideas and you try some of it, like
give me an example.
take the vacation, book the trip, go. So for me, I worked remotely in Barcelona in December by myself, and it's like that's something that my grandma would have never been able to do. Like I feel like, just being able to do things while I'm free and while I don't have any responsibilities, it's like, why not? I think life is meant to be like to live and to enjoy it. And I don't feel like the struggle Olympics, especially the struggle Olympics our community feels like we have to go through to be able to enjoy nice things. Like I don't prescribe to things like that. So yeah, I say all that to say that I hope older generations can realize the things, change is good sometimes, and like you all will be able to, not you because I know you 25, I know you in your late 20s.
Okay,
like,
and then some.
period. I just know that you all will be able to benefit from those things.
Okay, let's talk about another phrase: code switching. What? This is something I'm learning. What is that?
Well, I can show you better than I can tell you. So let's say I'm the only Black woman in the call, which is typically the case. I might get on the call. I don't feel like I code switch that much because I feel like the way I talk is just the way I talk. But the way I'm a kiki with my girlfriends versus when I get on the call and I'm a lot more articulate and I get to the point and like it's clear cut, direct. I'm not going to use certain slang words. That's code switching. Like I might speak to my homegirl and be like, girl, let me tell you how such and such really da-da-da. I'm going to put that phone down and get on my call and be like, I'm cutting all of that. Like it's a lot more professional, polished. And hear me when I say me speaking to my friends and the way I speak, like in the comfort of my own home, it's not a bad thing. And I think people look at code switching as if like what feels natural to you is bad. It's not. We just do that as a way to protect ourselves because oftentimes when we've shown ourselves in our culture and like us in our natural state, it's been used against us. So you see a lot of people of color go into the workplace and it's like, it's strictly business, so that nobody can hold anything against you. Because going back to the unconscious bias, when they hear you maybe talking in like however you feel most comfortable, like using slang, it's like, well, she might not be equipped to do the job. You might be the best person for the role, but it's like, well, if she's using this lingo, she might say that in front of our client, or she might say that in front. So, yeah, a lot of us, we do it, and how I was saying earlier, we don't even realize we do it sometimes. It's so second nature. For a lot of Black folks, things are so second nature to us that it's scary.
And do you think that some people who aren't aware, not of that term so much, but just the concept, that they aren't necessarily successful on a job because they don't know how to switch it, and the internal biases of others, they end up leaving or, not being successful?
Yeah, I do think it can hurt you, unfortunately, if you don't figure it out, especially when I think when you're early in your career, you have to figure it out because you have to like prove yourself. And I feel like now I'm not even that senior. I'm not senior in my career, I would say, but I feel like I'm confident in the work that I deliver, and I know that I'm good at what I do, where it's like, I may talk to you this one way, but you know what the results are going to look like. And like, it's one of those things where it's, you have more backing. But I feel like when you're young in your career as a person of color, you got to figure out how to code switch. Like it's just a protection mechanism, I would say.
And again, I'm
Yeah.
always thinking about Invisible Matters.
Yeah.
I would think that could cause a lot of anxiety for a person who all day long, 8 hours, really can't, they may not feel like they're in their skin, their real skin. That's a long time.
It is.
That's a long time. And over time, over weeks, over months, I think that's what leads to some of the mental health issues that people have related to their jobs.
You ate with that one. I'm like, I don't deny that, but I will say, I don't think you have to compromise yourself in doing things like this. I think it's figuring out what that balance is where you still feel like you bring your sense of self to the table, but in a way where you are still mindful of the settings. Like I think naturally, whatever you do, you have to go in and read the room and figure out who you're working with. But I think you should still show up as yourself, but just with a certain level of mindfulness, especially if you are the only. Because like I said, you might have to humanize yourself a little bit before you go into fully being yourself. Because if they don't get it, it very well is probably going to be used against you. I worked for a company that I'm really proud of, like Levi Strauss. That was probably one of the employers I was most proud to work for, just because of what they were doing and how they gave back and how they spoke out on social issues. And like, that's the things that matter to us, because at the end of the day, like, you can go almost anywhere and get the money if you're within the industry. Like, you can get a tech salary at another tech company, but going to a company that just aligns with you is really important. And I also think it helps with your mental health. Like, if you work for a company that is always in the news for doing some controversial things, it's like,
Yeah, you're on edge, wondering if people are judging you. Like, what is she thinking, I wonder?
And you're less likely to want to perform when you're working for a company that you can't even get behind, It's like, I'm not proud of you. I'm not proud of the things that you guys are doing in society. So I think that's one of my biggest tips. I always tell students, I'm like, there's so much money out there, like, that shouldn't be your driving force. I understand in this economy, every dollar counts, but find a company that aligns with your values and the things that matter to you, because that might keep you there a little bit longer.
And on the other side, how important is it for a person to feel valued on their job?
It's so important.
I don't care what they're doing. I don't care what the job is.
Yeah.
But you could be working your fingers to the bone and feel like nobody is acknowledging it. Nobody realizes, does anybody know what I'm doing here? The extra effort, I'm feeling stressed sometimes because I'm trying to keep up. I want to do the best job that I can. But does anybody know it? And talk about the importance of valuing employees.
If you don't, they will leave. And I think that's the beauty of the new ways of working. It's like, if you're not going to give me what I need, somebody else will. And I will say it is partly on us as individuals to tell the company what you need. I think sometimes we expect, I was thinking about it on the way here. I'm like, people always assume just because you are a manager, it means you're a good people manager, in the sense where it's like, you're good with people. And it's like, you just might be very good at your job.
That's
and
right.
It doesn't mean they're a bad person, but they just don't know how to develop you. And you have to learn to advocate for yourself. You have to learn how to, and I think a lot of people, women of color, don't do this, or just women in general. We don't toot our horn enough. Like, and sometimes it's not that they don't want to value you, they just don't know what you're doing. So I think it's partly on us. And I do think the other half, a lot is on the company of, invest in your employees. Because if you don't invest in them, if you don't pour into them, they have the right to leave, and they will leave.
Yeah. And they probably should,
Yeah.
because that is going to become an invisible matter if they don't.
Come on.
They're not going to be happy.
Yeah.
So I just, just in wrapping up, first of all, this has been so much good information.
It's been so fun. This has been so
We
fun.
might have to do a part 2. I learned a lot, and I hope all of the viewers have learned a lot as well. You heard how important it is for people to feel valued on their jobs, to feel like they're included on their jobs. You want to maintain your sense of work-life balance. Take care of yourself. Wellness is very important. And so, as we think about the invisible matters that take place in the workplace, keep those things in mind. And I just want everybody to really take care of yourself. That's what this is really all about, so that you can reach your individual potential. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Nandy. And if you enjoyed this, please follow us and subscribe and share it with a friend. Take care. See you next time. Bye-bye.